Welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we conclude our look at the Beach Boys Today and look at the Help Me Rhonda single released just shortly after the Today album. We pick up roughly midway through the legendary and outstanding sequence of songs that make up most of side 2. Last time we left off with the Beach Boys' beautiful update of the Students' 1958 doo-wop number, I'm So Young. Coming after the yearning I'm So Young, Kiss Me Baby feels like a warm breeze. It's about a couple who've had an argument. I suppose it's a matter of interpretation, but lyrically and musically, I've always thought of it more as a makeup record than a breakup record. The lush instrumentation is complex and powerful, but never interferes with the intimate feeling of the song. Once again, Brian's high vocal plays off Mike's low vocal beautifully. The multi-layered vocal arrangement in the chorus is one of my all-time favorite bits of recorded music. It's a great record, and on an album of great songs, this is possibly my favorite. The fourth track on side 2, She Knows Me Too Well, had originally been released 6.5 months earlier as the B-side of the fourth track on side 1, When I Grew Up to Be a Man. It's another track we already discussed in detail in episode 212. Again, some Beach Boys fans might have been slightly disappointed to have Today filled out with tracks from earlier singles, but She Knows Me Too Well is far too good a record to only be a B-side. Though the song had been recorded and released the previous summer, it fit in perfectly with Brian's more recent work on this side of the album. It's another great track. That's followed by a new Brian Wilson song, In the Back of My Mind. In his 2016 autobiography, I Am Brian Wilson, Brian said the melody was inspired by the Skyliners' 1959 number 12 hit, Since I Don't Have You. I can hear some vague similarity, but it's certainly nothing I'd have picked up on. Brian also called the line, In the Back of My Mind, I Still Have My Fears, one of the most honest lines he ever wrote, adding that he's never been afraid to admit fear. Of course, that's true, and that openness, honesty, and vulnerability is part of what makes Brian's work unique. At his best, he speaks from the heart in a way few artists can. This is maybe the most mature work Brian had done up to this time. There's nothing about it that says teen record. Along those same lines, there's a more subtle change apparent in the first 2 lines, I'm blessed with everything, a world to which a man can cling. A little over 6 months earlier, they were wistfully pondering When I Grew Up to Be a Man. Now, lyrically, they seem to regard themselves as having arrived. Brian marrying in December might have had something to do with the change, and of course, they'd all had enough new experiences for a lifetime during those 6 months. It might have been the influence of the Beatles, who clearly regarded themselves as men. It might have been that the earlier song was just written from a teenager's point of view. It might be that the word man just sounded right, but I think not too long before this, they would have used the word guy instead of man. It's also pretty hard to imagine a Beach Boys song containing a line like, I tried to rationalize, but someday I might realize before this. Things were definitely changing. Brian says he gave the lead vocal to Dennis because he never really had a chance to sing very much. That's true, but I'm sure the choice was far from arbitrary. Brian knew what he was doing, and Dennis turns in what will be one of many, not technically excellent, but highly emotionally effective vocal performances in his career. Brian adds that he thought Dennis's vocal was great. It's another fantastic song and a fantastic sequence. Having created a beautiful mood with the track sequence on side 2, the effect is undercut jarringly by the Bull session featuring the group minus Alan and including Brian's wife Marilyn, passing around hamburgers and talking to Big Daddy, Earl Leaf, about their experiences on their recent European tour. Earl Leaf was a photographer and a globe-trotting adventurer who became part of the Hollywood paparazzi and a celebrity photographer in the 1950s. He was a colorful personality, sometimes known as Loose Leaf or the Beatnik photographer. Because he'll increasingly concentrate on photographing teen stars in the 60s, Leaf will also become known as the world's oldest teenager. He was nearly 60 when the Bull session was recorded. Leaf was a favorite of the Beach Boys and accompanied them as official tour photographer on the European tour they're discussing. It sounds as if they might also have wanted Leaf along on the tour because he was an experienced world traveler. The Bull session was recorded in the studio at Western Recorders on January 13th, 1965, in a session that also saw the beginning of work on In the Back of My Mind and Good to My Baby. The track runs 2 minutes and 17 seconds, edited down from a tape that runs 20 minutes and 12 seconds. For a long time, I thought this was an excerpt from an interview. Listening to the complete tape, it's clearly more of an audio experiment by Brian, who can be heard occasionally directing the recording and discussing with Mike how they should proceed. Brian's concept is that they should just sit around and talk. Mike is clearly worried that the result will be too chaotic and suggests that Earl should question them individually. At one point, Brian suggests that they question Earl. Brian clearly wants to capture unscripted, fly-on-the-wall conversation, and I get the impression that, in addition to being an experienced interviewer and having been on the European tour they're discussing, Earl Leaf is included because he was quite a character himself. Of course, it's a track that carries on from earlier album filler like Cassius Love vs. Sonny Wilson and Our Favorite Recording Sessions. In a way, it's a precursor to some of the audio verite experiments Brian will undertake over the next couple of years, like Brian Falls into a Piano and the Hal Blaine Vegetables segment from the Smile Sessions, or even the Barking Dogs and Train effect that will close Pet Sounds. Incidentally, in case you're interested, I found a couple of circa late 50s photos of Richard J. Dick Rising, the Capitol Records representative who Brian describes in the recording as one of the greatest guys he ever met. Of course, a common point of discussion about Beach Boys today is why they chose Bull Session to close the album. I've got to believe that Side 2 was used as the background for countless teen makeout sessions over the years, and that thousands of times, just when things were going good, the mood would be shattered by Earl Leaf saying, "Well, are we on?" In part, its placement at the end of the side may have just been a holdover from early 60s album sequencing, which held that you started each side with the strongest track and worked your way down to the weakest. The fact it ended up closing out the slow side rather than the fast side might be purely down to making the album sides more even, both in the number of tracks and in the running time. In 2022, Mike Love commented, "It may have occurred to us that this will be enough to complete the album, that if we record this, it'll be enough to turn the album in, but I think it was just a way to lighten the mood." They might have been afraid that they'd be seen as taking themselves too seriously if they closed the album with another slow one. Not only does Bull Session help fill the album, it reminds us that these are fun-loving boys in the Beatles mold. During this period, Capitol was clearly interested in presenting the Beach Boys as all-round entertainment personalities like the Beatles. When Capitol launched their own in-house fan magazine, The Teen Set, in October 1964, the entire first issue was devoted to the Beach Boys. A primary writer and photographer for the Teen Set magazine, incidentally, will be Earl Leaf, seen here with Brian promoting both the Beach Boys concert album and the first issue of The Teen Set. Later in 1965, Capitol will launch a motion picture division with a Hard Day's Night style film starring the Beach Boys planned as one of their first projects. More about that when we come to the fourth quarter of 1965. With that in mind, I'm guessing that Capitol was pleased to end the album with a youthful, fun slice of life featuring the boys. While it certainly comes across as filler, Bull Session with the Big Daddy seems to exist in this weird nexus between early 60s pop group promotion and late 60s audio verite psychedelia. In an interesting footnote, Alan Jardine gets a writing credit on Bull Session with the Big Daddy, even though he wasn't part of it. On the unedited tape, Mike makes reference to wanting to make it appear that Al was there. He might be included with the rest of the group in the credit for the same reason. In any case, I'm sure Al was pleased, and having his name included undoubtedly brought him some money. Today is the first Beach Boys album without any references to cars or to surfing, or even overt references to the beach or summertime. The closest it comes to addressing teen fads are the two songs about dancing, but they're not about any particular dance craze like the Jerk or the Frug. As we're discussing in the 1965 pop culture episodes, surfing was still a going concern of youth culture at the time, at least as far as filmmakers were concerned, with beach party scenarios featuring in 1965 releases like Beach Ball, Beach Blanket Bingo, How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, A Swingin' Summer, Girl Happy with Elvis Presley, and Girls on the Beach with the Beach Boys. Of course, film production schedules meant that a lot of these movies, including Girls on the Beach, had gone into production long before they were released, but they still found ready teen audiences in 1965 and were mostly profitable. The Beach Boys, meanwhile, had clearly moved on before teen beach and surfing culture really began to fade. Surfing won't be mentioned again in a Beach Boys release until Do It Again in 1968, and then, of course, it'll be nostalgically. For now, the group's lyrics begin exploring more mature, complex, and universal themes that will eventually lead them to Pet Sounds. Of course, the music continues to become more mature and more complex too. Beach Boys Today will spend 4 weeks at number 4 beginning May 1st, 1965. Ahead of Today on the charts during those 4 weeks will be the Mary Poppins soundtrack at number 1. Introducing Herman's Hermits will be number 2 for the first 3 weeks and number 3 for the final week. The Goldfinger soundtrack will be number 3 for the first week, with the Sound of Music soundtrack replacing it at number 3 for the next 2 weeks. The Sound of Music will go to number 2 in the final week. It was a minor come down after Beach Boys concerts 4 weeks at number 1, but on track with their last studio album, All Summer Long, which had spent 5 weeks at number 4 late in the summer of '64. It did much better than the number 13 showing of Shutdown Volume 2, which was released about a year earlier during the first rush of US Beatlemania. Over the years, Today has certainly become the best loved of the Beach Boys' early albums, with Side 2 widely recognized as a masterful song sequence that pointed the way to Pet Sounds just over a year later. When I first heard the album in 1980, based on the rather anonymous title and the sort of typical early mid-60s album artwork, I was expecting the usual collection of tracks. The beauty and emotional impact of Side 2 came as a complete surprise to me and helped cement my deep love and appreciation for their work. Brian notes in I Am Brian Wilson that the Today album was the beginning of control issues, saying that Capitol didn't get the hits they wanted from Beach Boys Today. Do You Want to Dance and Dance, Dance, Dance were successful, but they weren't successful in the way that Capitol imagined. They imagined a situation where the tower of hits would just get higher and higher. After Beach Boys Today, they put on pressure to bring them big sales. The Beach Boys would add to that imagined tower of hits with their next single. The re-recorded version of Help Me Rhonda with an H added to the name was released as the Beach Boys' new single on April 5th, about a month after the Today album. The B-side was Kiss Me Baby from Today. Having heard the Beach Boys Today version and spotting its commercial potential, on March 24th, Terry Melcher recorded his own version of Help Me Rhonda to be released as a single credited either to the Ripcords or to Bruce and Terry. In Melcher's recollection, Brian came to his office a short time later and asked Melcher not to release his version because Brian intended to re-record it with the Beach Boys for a single to be released as soon as their current single had completed its chart run. Do You Want to Dance was at number 19 at the time of Melcher's recording, on its way to number 12 on April 10th. Actually, it appears that Brian had finished the Beach Boys single version of Help Me Rhonda 2 days before Melcher recorded his. Melcher said he agreed to pull his version out of respect for Brian's talent, though he says he thinks they had the essence of it. In Mike Love's recollection in his 2016 autobiography and in Keith Badman's book, Brian got the idea to re-record Help Me Rhonda as a single after hearing Terry Melcher was intending to do it. I suppose that's possible, but if the available dates are correct, the Beach Boys started to record the single version 2 weeks before the song was released on Today and a month before Melcher cut his version. Seemingly, it would mean that Melcher must have heard it pre-release, then talked about it for over a month before getting down to recording it, by which time, as I mentioned, the Beach Boys single version was already complete. In his 1991 memoir, Wouldn't It Be Nice?, Brian says Gary Usher asked to record it as a single in February 1965, which is what motivated Brian to re-record it as a single for the Beach Boys. Though much of that memoir has been called into question, in a lot of ways that would make sense. Apparently, Usher never recorded a version, but if he knew Brian intended it as a Beach Boys single, there probably wouldn't have been any point. The Terry Melcher version was finally released in 1998 on the Sundazed Best of Bruce and Terry compilation. It's an interesting listen. It's decidedly weaker than the Beach Boys version, with more of an early 60s sound, a more prominent, though not particularly strong drum kit, and a big saxophone break. The way Melcher sings Help Me Get Her Out of My Heart at the end of the first chorus is completely different from the way the Beach Boys do it. It's doubtful that Melcher would have had the success with it that the Beach Boys did. In any case, the duo of Bruce and Terry was winding down as they got busy with other projects, and one of them was about to become a permanent member of the Beach Boys. For the Beach Boys single, Brian retained Alan Jardine as lead singer, and of course it'll become one of Al's signature songs. The single opens with a heavy bass line. It's guitar-driven, punchier, with much more polished, complex, and prominent harmony vocals, and the word ruined is replaced by the word shattered. Of course, it's a great single and a highlight of the group's career. Help Me Rhonda will become the Beach Boys' second #1 single on May 29th when it replaces the Beatles' Ticket to Ride at the top of the chart. After 2 weeks at #1, it'll be replaced by the Supremes' Back in My Arms Again. And that's where we'll leave it for this week. Thanks for watching. As always, I look forward to your thoughts and perspective. I hope you'll join me next week when we carry on our look at 1965 pop culture with the second quarter of the year. Meanwhile, please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Bye.